Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls date back to the first 2 centuries before the Common Era. By carbon-14, we're sure they are exactly that old. And it's remarkable because up until the discovery of the scrolls, the oldest copies of the biblical text known to exist in the world were medieval, to begin with by a Bedouin shepherd lad, and stumbled in a cave upon a whole row of earthenware jars. They found a bundle of oddly wrapped parchments inside, didn't know what they were, took them off and ended up selling them to a shopkeeper in Bethlehem. He didn't know what they were either. They turned out to be the most important biblical find ever. The Dead Sea Scrolls containing copies, at least fragments, of each and every book of the Hebrew scriptures, as well as scores and scores of additional books, at least fragments of scores and scores, perhaps even hundreds of books, texts that were unknown to the world until 1947. Quite by accident, a Bedouin shepherd lad stumbled upon them in a cave. Well, the scrolls were copies of the Bible. The Bible has a very long chain of custody, as it were, copies of copies of copies of copies, and we don't know exactly how old the earliest copies of the Bible were. And now we've got texts of the Bible that are almost word for word identical to Bibles we read today in Hebrew that date back about 1,000 years older than the previous oldest text. They do indicate that there was a great expectation for the coming of the Mashiach, the Anointed One. They had an apocalyptic sense that they were living in the end of days, and that is brought all the more into focus by the recent finds just announced by the Israel Antiquities Authority within the last year. There's this Operation Scroll ongoing for the past several years where they're trying to find any additional fragments that the Bedouin might have missed. They found in the end, over these past several years, a whole number of ancient coins as well as Roman arrowheads, because there was warfare going on in those days with the legions of Rome. And most intriguingly, just announced within the last year, a series of about 20 parchment fragments discovered in the distant recesses of one cave in particular. It's called the Cave of Horror. A great rabbi named Akiva, one of the greatest rabbis of all Jewish history, proclaimed him to be the Messiah, and they believed it. Well, the Romans, under the Emperor Hadrian, put it down even more ferociously than they put down the first revolt. And the very remnants of that revolt hid in caves, the same caves on the western shore of the Dead Sea, including the Cave of Horror, remnants of that second horrific revolt. But they believed that this was the very end of days. So when Operation Scroll found these new fragments and just unveiled them within the last year, what did the fragments read? Of all the texts they might have found, the fragments that were now released read this: "The mountains quake before him, the hills melt, and the earth heaves at his presence. Yes, the world and all who dwell in it. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the fury of his wrath? His fury is poured out like fire, and the rocks are thrown down by him." And they had a sense that this was the end of days. I don't know when the end of days will be, but I can tell you that in the Jewish world, which I'm a part of, there is also discussion of what's called the pangs of the Messiah. Before the Messianic age and the world of peace will dawn, but before the end comes, there will be a time of trouble, of pangs, birth pangs as it were, a time of war, famine. Even inflation is mentioned among the ancient rabbis. So we look out today at the various threats. I look at the nuclear threats around the world today, especially in the Middle East. We need to re-examine these biblical texts and take them as seriously as we can, because these traditions are well-founded and they are very ancient indeed.